The hum of Enzo Walker's car engine faded to a distant buzz, and then nothing. The silence that settled in its place was not peace. It was a vacuum, a pressure in Olivia Popov's ears as she stood, immobile, in the small apartment's living room. Her hand was pressed flat against the cold glass of the window, her only anchor in a world that had just been turned upside down. Outside, the gray, unfamiliar street continued its indifferent life. Inside, the old refrigerator's constant, high-pitched hum was the only sound keeping her company. It was an irritating noise, but at least it was predictable. Predictability was all she had left. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on the texture of the glass, the way the cold seeped into her skin. It was real. The silence was real. The abandonment was real. I wonder from what part of the world you are watching this story now, and if you have ever felt a silence so heavy. It's a feeling that consumes you from the inside. If you enjoy stories that showcase the strength of the human spirit, subscribe to our channel, because what happened next to Olivia is proof that justice, sometimes, finds its way in unexpected forms. Olivia never saw herself as an autistic person. She was simply Olivia. It was the world that was too loud, too fast, too bright. Her childhood memories weren't of grand events, but of small sensations. The velvety texture of a sage leaf in her grandmother's garden, the repetitive pattern of her bedroom wallpaper, the rhythmic sound of her mother's sewing machine. These were her safe harbors. When Enzo and Julia were born, she tried to give them the same. Her love wasn't expressed in expansive hugs or boisterous declarations, which always made her uncomfortable. Her love was in the precision with which she cut vegetables for soup, always in perfect 5mm cubes. It was in the way she organized their toys by color and size, creating a visual order that, for her, was synonymous with peace and security. It was in the bedtime rituals, 3 stories, the exact same ones, in the same order, followed by a glass of warm milk at a specific temperature. To her, that routine was the purest declaration of love. I care enough to keep your world safe and predictable. For years it seemed to work. Enzo and Julia clung to her, their small worlds revolving around that center of calm and order. They didn't need words she couldn't speak. They felt the solidity of her care. But children grow, and the world outside begins to whisper to them. In their adolescence, what had been safety became strangeness. Olivia's need to exit a noisy store was now an embarrassment. Her difficulty in making eye contact during parent-teacher conferences became a source of jokes. "My mom is different," Julia Flores would tell her friends, her tone a mix of apology and accusation. Enzo was more direct. "Mom, why can't you just be normal?" he'd asked once, after she'd had a sensory overload at a family party. Due to the loud music and flashing lights, the word normal hit her like a stone. She had no answer. How do you explain that your brain is wired differently? How do you describe the physical pain that a loud sound can inflict? They began to build walls around her, walls made of impatience and shame. Quiet meals became tense. Her once cherished rituals were now seen as burdens. "Mom, I'm not 6 anymore. I don't need you to line up my shoes," Enzo would complain. Olivia retreated inward. Her love hadn't changed. It was still as precise and deep as ever, but they had stopped being able to see it. They only saw the frame, not the painting. They saw the oddness, not the care, and that was the first of many heartbreaks, a wound that never fully healed. She continued to love them the only way she knew how, hoping that one day they would see the mother who had always been there, behind the noise and confusion of the outside world. The idea of selling the family home was presented as an act of love. "Mom, this house is too big for you," Julia said, her voice soft and practiced, stirring her coffee. "It's a lot of upkeep, a lot of worry. We've found a perfect solution." Enzo Walker, ever the pragmatist, opened his laptop and showed her photos of an apartment. It looked clean, modern, compact. "It's safer, Mom. Everything new, no problems. And we'll be there for whatever you need. We'll help you move, get you settled. You'll be much more comfortable." Olivia looked at the walls of her home, each one an archive of memories. The scuff mark on the kitchen wall where a 5-year-old Enzo had thrown a toy car. The corner of the living room where the morning sun hit. Her favorite reading spot. This house wasn't just brick and mortar. It was her skin, her order, her sanctuary. But she looked at her children's expectant faces. They seemed so concerned, so caring. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was a burden, and this was their way of relieving her. The trust she placed in them, built over a lifetime, was her Achilles heel. She couldn't read between the lines, couldn't perceive the falsity behind the smiles. She only saw what they wanted her to see. Concerned children looking after their mother. The process was a blur. She signed papers she didn't understand, packed a lifetime into boxes that seemed too small. Enzo and Julia were always in a hurry. "We have to be quick, Mom, the buyer is in a rush." "Don't worry about it, we'll handle everything." They shielded her from every decision, treating her like a child. "The money from the house sale? We'll manage it for you, Mom. We'll open an account and pay all your expenses. You don't have to worry about anything." It was a perfect trap, disguised as care. On moving day, her false hope began to crumble. The apartment wasn't like the photos. It was smaller, darker. The walls were paper thin, and she could already hear the neighbor's television at a deafening volume. There was a damp patch on the bathroom ceiling, and the kitchen faucet dripped with maddening regularity. "It's just temporary, until we find something better," Julia lied, avoiding her gaze. They left the boxes piled in the middle of the living room and checked their watches. "Well, Mom, we have to go. We have an important meeting." Enzo gave her a quick, awkward hug. Julia kissed her forehead. "We'll call tomorrow, I promise." The door clicked shut. The sound of the car engine fading away was the sound of a promise broken. Tomorrow came and went. No one called. Not the next day either. Her calls went straight to voicemail. Her messages went unanswered. False hope hardened into a chilling certainty. They hadn't moved her to a better place. They had discarded her. The first few days bled into weeks of silent sensory agony. For Olivia, the world was an avalanche of stimuli, and her home had always been her dike. Now the dam had broken. The constant drip of the kitchen faucet wasn't just a sound, it was a drill into her skull, a rhythm that unraveled her thoughts. The hum of the old refrigerator was a dissonant note that never ceased. Through the thin walls, she heard everything. The neighbors' arguments, a baby's cry, the loud music that seemed to vibrate in her bones. Going outside was even worse. The street was a chaos of honking horns, sirens, and overlapping voices. The fluorescent lights of the supermarket were so bright they gave her headaches. People bumped into her, the unexpected touch of a stranger like an electric shock. Her world shrank to the four walls of that oppressive apartment. The food her children had left ran out. She tried to cook, but the disarray of the small kitchen, the lack of her familiar utensils, made the task overwhelming. She ended up eating cold toast for days. Loneliness was a physical presence. She spoke to the walls, narrating her day just to hear the sound of a voice. She clung to an old wool blanket, its rough texture familiar and comforting, running, her fingers over the worn fibers for hours. A social worker, Eva Rossi, appeared at her door one day, alerted by a concerned neighbor. Eva was kind, but her speech was rapid, filled with questions Olivia couldn't process. "Are you all right? Do you need anything? Where are your children?" Olivia couldn't articulate the words to describe her despair. How to explain that the problem wasn't just the lack of food, but that the sound of the dripping faucet was driving her mad? How to say that the texture of the new carpet scratched her, or that the light coming through the window was too aggressive? Her difficulties were invisible to the world. To Eva, she just looked like a confused elderly woman. The social worker made a few calls. "I tried to reach your son, Enzo Walker, but he said he's very busy on a business trip. He said he sends you money every month." It was another lie. The money from the house sale was funding Enzo's new company and Julia's lavish lifestyle. For Olivia, they left just enough for rent and almost nothing more. The system wasn't equipped to help her. It saw a woman with a roof over her head and supposedly financial support from her children. It didn't see the daily torture, the profound isolation, the anguish of a mind that processes the world differently. Olivia was trapped, not by bars, but by a web of misunderstanding and neglect. The world looked at her, but it didn't see her. And in the silence of her apartment, she began to believe what her children had made her feel, that she was invisible. On one particularly gray afternoon, when despair threatened to swallow her whole, Olivia felt a sudden, overwhelming need for order. If she couldn't control the world around her, she could at least control the small space she had left. She began to empty the last cardboard box her children had left in a corner, filled with items they deemed sentimental junk. Inside, beneath old photos and yellowed postcards, she found a small metal tin, rusted at the edges. It had belonged to her great-aunt Maya Erdem, a woman who had moved abroad when Olivia was a child and of whom she only had vague memories. Her children had always referred to the tin as old junk, driven by an impulse she didn't understand. She sat on the floor and opened it. It was filled with letters written in elegant but formal and complex handwriting that was difficult for her to decipher. The mental effort was immense, but the need to connect with something from her past was stronger. The next day she gathered the courage to knock on the door of her next-door neighbor, Mateo Wozniak, a young student who sometimes greeted her with a shy smile. Hesitantly, she asked him for help reading the letters. Mateo, with infinite patience, sat with her for hours. The letters told the story of a fascinating and solitary life, but it was the last letter, tucked inside an official envelope with a foreign stamp, that changed everything. It wasn't from Maya. It was from a law firm. The lawyer, a man named Theodore Mendez, wrote that for almost 5 years he had been trying to contact Olivia Popov. Her great-aunt Maya had passed away with no direct heirs, except her. She had left her entire estate to her. Mateo read the list aloud, his voice wavering with disbelief. Stocks, properties in various European cities, an investment portfolio. The total value was over 60 million euros. Olivia fell silent, trying to process the information. 60 million. The number was so abstract it held no meaning. What held meaning was the date on the letter. It had been sent 5 years ago to her old house. Her children had received it. They knew all along. The sale of the house, the squalid apartment, the abandonment. It hadn't been out of shame or impatience. It had been a cold, calculated plan to isolate her, to keep her ignorant of her own fortune while they used the little money she had. The revelation brought no joy, but a sharp, icy pain. Theodore Mendes was found quickly. He flew to see her as soon as they contacted him. He was an older man with a calm gaze and a gentle voice that didn't overwhelm her. He didn't treat her as if she were fragile or incapable. He explained everything clearly, in logical steps, using simple diagrams when words became too complex. He saw the intelligent, methodical woman behind her anxiety. The shift wasn't a thunderclap, but a quiet click. The moment her self-perception realigned with the truth. She wasn't a burden. She was the heir. And her children weren't reluctant caretakers. They were thieves. The first thing Olivia did with access to her new resources wasn't to buy a mansion or a luxury car. It was to hire a plumber. The sound of silence, when the faucet finally stopped dripping, was the first melody of her new life. It was a small but monumental victory. Next, with Theodore's help, she bought the best noise-canceling headphones money could buy. For the first time in years, she could walk down the street, and the chaos of the world became a distant murmur. It was like breathing after being underwater for too long. Her next victory was finding a new place to live. This time, she was the one choosing. She visited dozens of apartments, but she didn't look at size or luxury. She looked at the light, the sound, the textures. She chose an apartment on the top floor of a quiet building with triple-glazed windows and a small terrace overlooking an inner garden. There were no noisy neighbors, only the distant chirping of birds. She furnished it slowly with meticulous care. Every object had a purpose and a place. Sofas with soft fabrics, rugs of natural fibers, indirect, adjustable lighting. She created a sanctuary perfectly tailored to her sensory needs. Her world, which had shrunk to 4 oppressive walls, began to expand again, but on her own terms. She began to rediscover small joys. She bought books on botany and filled her terrace with plants, finding a deep peace in the ritual of tending to them. The quiet growth of a new leaf was a miracle she could fully appreciate. She hired a private chef, not for ostentation, but because he was a patient man named Luca Suzuki, who understood her dietary sensitivities and cooked meals that were both nutritious and sensorially pleasing. These were daily victories. The act of drinking a cup of hot tea on her quiet terrace, the ability to read a book for hours without being interrupted by overwhelming noises, the rediscovery of her own rhythm. But her greatest victory was the creation of the Maja Popov Foundation. With Theodore's guidance, she used a significant portion of her inheritance to establish an organization dedicated to supporting autistic adults who, like her, had been abandoned or neglected by their families. The foundation provided safe housing, therapeutic support, and tailored vocational training. At one of the first board meetings, with people like Dr. Daniel Choi, a neurodiversity specialist, Olivia spoke. Her voice was soft but firm. She didn't talk about money. She spoke about the pain of a dripping faucet and the importance of having a safe space in the world. The people in the room listened, not with pity, but with profound respect. In that moment, Olivia was not the fragile victim her children had tried to mold her into. She was a philanthropist, a visionary, a woman who was transforming her pain into a legacy of hope for others. She was building, brick by brick, not just her own life, but also a safe harbor for many others. With safety and stability came a painful clarity. In the silence of her new apartment, surrounded by order and peace, Olivia finally had room to process the depth of her children's betrayal. For years she had internalized the blame. She had believed that her strangeness was the cause of their distancing, that she had somehow failed as a mother. Now she saw the truth with a breathtaking clarity. The problem had never been her. The problem had always been them. Their cruelty hadn't been born of frustration with her autism. It had been born of greed that her autism made convenient to exploit. They hadn't seen her as a person with needs and feelings, but as a problem to be managed, and later, as a piggy bank to be emptied. The discovery of the inheritance hadn't changed her intrinsic worth. It had merely exposed their complete lack of moral worth. This realization brought no joy, at least not at first. What she felt was a profound grief, a sorrow that settled into her bones. She mourned the children she thought she had, the childhood memories that now seemed tainted by a future lie. She mourned the unconditional love she had given them, a love they had taken and used as a weapon against her. She remembered Enzo, with a high fever, and how she had spent 3 nights straight by his side, placing cool cloths on his forehead, because he couldn't stand the texture of the sheets. She remembered Julia, crying over a broken heart, and how she had sat silently beside her for hours, offering her calm presence because she knew words would have overwhelmed her. That love had been real on her part, and the realization that it had been unreciprocated, that it had been merely a convenience for them, was the deepest wound of all. Theodore Mendez, who had become more of a friend than a lawyer, listened patiently. "They underestimated you, Olivia," he said one day. "They saw your struggles, but they never saw your strength." Her strength lay in her resilience, in her ability to find order in chaos, in her unwavering integrity. She would never have done to them what they did to her, not for €1 billion. Her mind didn't work that way. Greed was as foreign a concept to her as small talk or dishonesty. The pain of mourning slowly gave way to a new resolve. It wasn't revenge she wanted, not in the petty sense of the word. It was justice. It was the need for the truth to be exposed, not just for her, but for all the people who had ever been deemed less than for being different. She realized that the silence that had been imposed on her as a punishment could now be her greatest weapon. She didn't need to shout to be heard. She just needed to show up and let the truth speak for itself. Her reflection wasn't on how to destroy them, but on how to reclaim her own narrative, how to rewrite the story they had tried to erase. The Chamber of Commerce annual charity gala was the social event of the year, a sea of haute couture gowns and calculated smiles. At the center of it all this year were Enzo Walker and Julia Flores. Their new consulting firm, Walker Flores Global, was the headline sponsor. They had used the money from their mother's house sale to build a facade of success and philanthropy. That night they shone under the lights, accepting accolades and shaking hands with important people. The climax of the evening was Enzo's speech. He walked onto the stage, Julia by his side, both the epitome of elegance and success. "Our company was built on a fundamental principle," Enzo began, his voice resonating through the ballroom. "The value of family, the duty to care for our own, to support our community, especially the most vulnerable." The audience applauded. The irony was so thick it was almost palpable. As he spoke, the double doors at the back of the room quietly opened. 3 figures entered. Olivia Popov in the center, wore a simple, dark-colored dress, but impeccably tailored. Her posture was straight, her face serene. Beside her was Theodore Mendez, his presence calm and commanding. They walked slowly down the center aisle, and a murmur began to spread through the crowd. People turned to look, recognizing the resemblance between the woman and the speakers on stage. On stage? Enzo faltered, his voice catching as he saw his mother. Julia went pale, her smile frozen on her face. They continued their advance, stopping in front of the stage. Murmur in the room turned into a shocked silence. Theodore Mendez picked up a microphone that a pre-briefed stagehand handed to him. "My apologies for the interruption," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight. "We'd just like to make a special announcement. Tonight's anonymous principal donor who contributed 5 million euros to charity would like to be recognized." He turned to Olivia. "I present to you Ms. Olivia Popov, founder of the Maja Popov Foundation for Neurodivergent Adult Support and the true force behind tonight's generosity." A large screen behind Enzo and Julia, displaying their company's logo, flickered and changed. It now showed a stark image of the squalid apartment, the damp wall, the dripping faucet. Beside it, a screenshot of the missed call log from Olivia's cheap mobile phone. The sound of hundreds of people collectively inhaling in shock filled the room. Enzo, stammering, managed to say, "Mom, what are you doing here?" Olivia looked at her two children, not with hatred but with the cool distance of a star. She walked up the small steps to the stage, took the microphone from Enzo's trembling hand, and looked out at the crowd. Then, she looked directly at her children, their faces a mask of panic and humiliation. Her voice, when she spoke, was low, clear, and sharp, amplified by the sound system so that every syllable was heard. "You sold a house. I inherited a future," she said. "The math doesn't add up for you." She placed the microphone back on its stand, turned, and walked off the stage with the same dignified calm with which she had entered. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The last glimpse of the scene was the flash of phone cameras capturing the shattered faces of Enzo and Julia, alone and exposed under the harsh glare of their own spotlight. The final image, however, wasn't of them. It was of Olivia, later, on her quiet terrace, watering a small orchid that had just bloomed. Delicate yet incredibly resilient flower. And for the first time in a long time she smiled. This story shows that even when the world doesn't seem to see us, our inner strength and truth will eventually find a way to shine. Dignity isn't something they can take away, it's something we reclaim. If this story touched you, please like, comment, and subscribe. You never know who might need to hear a message of hope and justice today.